disaster management. So as a university, that's something we have done. Of course, I've done a fair bit of consulting, trainings, research, publication, and so on. So, I mean, that's what most university teachers do. What university teachers don't normally do is, dirty their hands out there in the field. And I think that's an added thing that we at the Tata Institute specialize in. I think that's something that we are a very applied kind of a university. And in our disaster management program, which was introduced, we have an MSc in disaster management, introduced in 2007. We now have a large number of engineers as well who come in with the idea of learning multidisciplinarity. So I want to place on record my sincere appreciation to IEEE as well as Dr. Rana for reaching out to me, for seeking me, and actually sort of bringing me to this platform. We often sort of criticize, people who work as engineers who are so far removed sometimes from the social reality. So it is my sincere pleasure to be addressing. It's not very often that people from engineering backgrounds ask us to come and speak as social scientists, but we often say this, that as the more we work hands-on, we realize complexity of social reality, and the way we have divided disciplines into various sort of compartments is fundamentally problematic. And I think multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity is what we talk about if we really want to succeed. And it's from that perspective that I thought it would be useful for us to really talk about science, policy, and society, and bring in a broader framework to disaster management. All right, so yeah, that's my introduction to the lecture as well. I was told that you have about an hour, so I will try, and I can stop at any time you tell me. I'm happy to stop. Okay. So no worries. If you think that it's getting too much or whatever, you can ask me to stop. I won't mind at all. Okay. So it would be useful if we kept some time for Q&A at the end. I do have like a wholesome sort of a presentation, but we could stop at any time. So I will keep an eye and try and maybe keep my tell me, should it be about 50 minutes or less?
It's going to be 7:15 now. Let's go up till 7:55 or 8, and we can keep around 5 to 10 minutes for question and answers. And if there are more questions, we'll reach out to you with the questions over email so that you can also clarify.
All right, wonderful, fine. Okay, so I start with a little sort of ode to everybody, saying Happy Engineers Day, which was on 15th of September. I got lots of people, the groups in which I am, I got messages like these ones, so I thought I will reciprocate. I also have on my cover slide a book that was brought out in the year 2020 on disaster studies, authored by me. So if there are people who are more interested at the end of the lecture and so on, they could certainly look at this book. It is becoming more and more popular because there is not much work that you find on disaster studies. So I would recommend at least people to read the first 2 chapters, which are interesting. Of course, there's more which would be interesting as well. All right. So broadly speaking, this is the structure of my presentation. And I'm making maybe a few sharp points. One is to look at science, policy, and society, and try and work towards integration and transdisciplinarity. I'm also going to start off by sharing with you how disasters are rising and extreme weather events are sort of around us all over the world. And yet we find that there is a disconnect between science, policy, and society, which I hope all of us as professionals would be able to address. And I think that's really the central piece, that how do we try and bring in understanding that exists in diverse domains? How do we invoke it in the work that we do? And that's really my central pitch. I'm also arguing for our ability to dwell further on the systems approach to understand interconnections. And yet there are barriers and challenges in practice. We will dwell on what those are and maybe briefly talk about the way forward. So that's broadly what my talk is about, and I hope it doesn't get too boring for you. Okay. Um, so it is now well established that science, technology, and innovation is something that is quite important for creation of a knowledge society. And we also recognize that this can only happen where the decision makers and citizens have the capacity and power to actually collectively choose the future we want for our planet and all its inhabitants. So the challenge really is that often technology takes over our lives and then it governs what we do. And the mobile technology is a classical example. I hear all parents of school going children that it's so hard to sort of yank the phone away from children. They're not able to read, study, etc., and everybody is busy chatting and not really being able to concentrate. Incidence of ADHD has increased amongst children. So there are many challenges that we find, and sometimes we also feel very helpless that is this the society that we want? I think these are questions which we are constantly grappling with. Complex economic, societal, and environmental and cultural challenges requires that all of this, the science, technology, and innovation, needs to be well integrated into society. So we technologists cannot ever say that, well, I'm working on this technology, let the society use it the way we want to use it. Television was one such example. In India, when we introduced the television, the argument was that it would be a tool to educate the rural masses. However, it soon became, more of a entertainment tool, and it continues to be an entertainment tool. So I think some of these issues, which earlier were seen as science being pretty neutral, is now well recognized that science is not really neutral, and what we produce through science and technology has serious repercussions in creating a society that we may or may not want. So I think those dimensions of ethics and implications need to be addressed, and we ideally should have a society where knowledge is co-created through a proactive interaction between science, policy, and people. So this exchange must be a fertile one, and we must proactively, we cannot talk about science for science sake alone. We really need to look at, and I think some of the questions that we are today discussing about uh, um, surrogacy, for instance. Yeah, that's a very ethical question. So there are many issues where science has advanced, but how do we contain certain issues and the legalities of actions that people take and so on? Okay, so if we value a culture of science in society where all people can discover the wonders of the world of science, learn about the influence of science in their everyday life, and if we can explore how we ourselves can contribute to science, yes, that is the world we want. So there's no doubt about it. All right, so in that case, we need to actively invest in educating and empowering citizens to use science and evidence-based research in order to make decisions that are judicious, well thought through. They are, of course, political decisions. And very often science says that it has nothing to do with politics, but that's not true. When we talk of politics, we are really talking about power. It's not only about party politics, but power is embedded in all of science. And I think we all know this. Today we are talking about surveillance, the making of Aadhaar card compulsory and linking it to your bank account. We're talking about privacy. I think we're talking about many things which tell us how power can be misused. And therefore, technology is also about politics and about personal choices. Okay. Coming to disaster management, generally, this is how disaster management is generally articulated. We talk about creating, strategies, creating a country which is, proactive, multi-disaster, and technology-driven. This is how we articulate it in India. And the idea of collective efforts of government agencies and NGOs are well embedded in our articulation of what disaster management should be. Globally, there has been a shift from relief-centric, reactive, and response-centric disaster management to an approach which is more holistic and integrated, with emphasis on prevention and preparedness, and also mitigation. How do you mitigate the impact of a disaster, something which is sometimes unavoidable? If we can prevent, we should certainly prevent a disaster, and we should be prepared, but we should also be in a position to mitigate should something happen. All right, so the aim really is to conserve developmental gains and minimize loss to life, livelihoods, and property. This is, again, globally accepted that this is what we should be doing, minimize loss of lives and damage to property. Now, from that perspective, risk-informed planning becomes extremely important. Something that, at least in India and many of the developing countries, we really don't have this. We do not have an embedded understanding. Environment impact assessments, all of us have heard about, but risk-informed planning is something that many of us are pushing with the government. And I think voluntarily, when we are working on projects, if we can work on the idea of risk-informed planning, that would be very valuable. I'll come back to this idea of risk governance towards the end of my talk. Okay, so with all our knowledge and information or developments and progress in science, we find that disasters are increasing globally, and that is a point of worry. So we have witnessed globally a tenfold increase in the number of natural disasters since 1960s. This is data which is kept very, very systematically by what is known as Center for Research in Epidemiology of Disasters, located in Belgium. So this entity has been keeping a very systematic database, very interesting data you get from them, which clearly shows that there has been a dramatic increase since 1960s onwards. And that really sort of converges with what one would call the Industrial Revolution and the consequences of modernization and so on. So from the 60s onwards, you find that many of the countries were on road to development. Most sort of most of the colonies were freed by the 60s and so on. And modernization sets in. So the UN also has been promoting that kind of modernization, and we find a dramatic increase. We also know today that changes in climate conditions, especially the warming of global temperatures, increases the livelihood of weather-related natural disasters. So extreme weather events are here to stay. We are experiencing all of that. Hotter global temperatures increase the risk of droughts, and they also increase the intensity of cyclone storms and create wetter monsoons. I think all of this are being experienced not just in our South Asian region, but the world over. This is yet another, for all of us who like numbers, that floods and storms account for 70% of all disasters. So if you look at the nature of disasters, floods and storms account for as much as 70%. So we need to be mindful of how we work towards future constructions. The kind of roads we build, the kind of maybe dams that we build, the kind of infrastructure that we build, we need to account for the fact that floods, storms, and sea level rise is something that's going to happen. So are we factoring it in? Are we factoring the risks, the increased risks, into the way in which planning takes place? And this is something very, very critical. And I always keep arguing about this, that the decision makers, the politicians, the builders are the ones who really need to be trained into, or at least made aware and educated. Educating children is one thing, but I think our politicians need to be educated because they work with, as you know, in a frame which is business as usual. We also have the classic example, let's say the Mumbai Coastal Link Road, which is being constructed, and there's every single model created by scientists, both in India and in the US, have told us that by 2050, a large part of South Mumbai, which is where the coastal road is also located, is going to be underwater. And yet we are pumping crores of rupees. So I think these are matters of concern. And as engineers, we all need to be aware of this. Okay, these are just figures which tell us the disaster impact since the last 20 years. I'll skip this slide. This is basically data to tell us that it is not the voice of an alarmist, but this is for real. There's enough data that's telling us that we need to be very careful about where we invest, because if our economic losses rise, we are going to have serious issues, especially the poor in the world, including in India. What happens to poor? And that's where the video on inequality would have been sort of educative and illustrative. Okay, so this is another sort of world risk map which tells us where disasters are likely to occur. There are underlying threats and there is a high threat. So I think these maps keep changing. This is a 2015 map and under updation. All right. Now, I want to a little bit dwell on why is it that despite science, progress, knowledge, data, information, we still are where we are, and we don't seem to be sort of internalizing the fact that we are in peril. So one of the arguments, by these two scholars says that our approach to understanding any system is to cut the big picture into smaller pieces, and some of the pieces lack detail and others are missing entirely. So this is part of our problem. And what is it that we are usually doing? We put together the puzzle. Putting together this puzzle is a rigorous scientific enterprise and does not happen automatically. Now, this is their way of saying that we do not integrate knowledge. Yeah, so we have moved in specialization mode, and we find that the super specialist really doesn't know anything about maybe another discipline or another domain, and that's part of the problem. So we are not talking enough with each other. In fact, in medical sciences, there is a big debate, and the argument is that the general physician, who used to be maybe about 30, 40 years ago, the general physician knew families and people, well, and would be treating, that family or individuals for 30, 40 years. That idea of general physician today has disappeared, and they want to bring it back so that you don't rush to a super specialist every time you have a cold or a cough, and you are straight away sent to a lung specialist and so on. So someone needs to put this puzzle together, is what they are arguing. And who's going to do that? Especially when you have diverse disciplinary perspectives. So this is just to bring in a little humor that if you are located in a certain place, you are going to see the world from that point of view. Yeah. So if you're a giraffe, this is the way you're going to see a woman's hat. And yes, the deer is not crossing the road has crossed the forest. So whose perspective are we looking at? Here's a little fellow who says this is deep, and the father is saying, or the man up there, adult, is saying it's not deep. So it really depends on your position, and I think this is an important aspect. When you locate yourself within your discipline and feel that, well, we are superior and we know best, and I think every discipline has this, that I mean, if I take the example of medicine, then those who do cardiology and neurosurgery, and I think they are seen as the more super specialized, and whereas people who are maybe dermatologists or gynecologists are seen as people at the lower end of these hierarchies are not meant to be, but whether you like it or not, they do come in. Okay. So then what exactly is needed? We require systemic integrative approaches to adequately understand physical and social processes and their interdependencies. We need more action-oriented and applied approaches in order to develop and implement context-sensitive and socially robust strategies in a sustainable manner. So this is just one indication that if you need to integrate things across time and space, then we need to look at space in terms of maybe land, ocean, and atmosphere, and so on. Yeah. The complex interface is something we need to recognize. We can't be saying that, okay, I'm an engineer, civil engineer, so my job is only to sort of look at the strength of a particular building or the design of a particular building. One needs to look at what's happening around it as well. So we have followed so far something called the pipeline knowledge production, where we identify problems and maybe we conduct some research which is very localized and context specific. And the research is proposing solutions, and slowly what was relevant for that particular context is used and replicated, what we call copy pasted, in all situations. And that's part of the problem. This is really pipeline knowledge production. And this is standard. I mean, it's not that I'm critiquing, but this is something that is the way the world has developed. However, there are several challenges and pitfalls of this pipeline production where science is one part, but when you start to translate that science and that knowledge into practice, you need to look at both policy and practice and make sure that when you're doing this translation, the scope for rejection needs to be there. And one really sort of needs to recognize institutional structures, communicating science. We need to look at scales, we need to look at context, we need to look at the money that is there. So there are several dimensions, including the cultural context, which need to be kept note of. Globally, I think because we are also scientists, it's good for us to understand that future Earth system challenges, if we look at what are those grand challenges, yeah? So there are these authors who collectively have written this article in Science Direct, and they say there are 5 key challenges. One is of forecasting. So forecasting future environmental conditions and their consequences for people. We need to look at the second challenge is observing. So our ability to develop, enhance, and integrate observation systems needed to manage global and regional environmental change. The third is, I just will give you a quick example. I was invited by Purdue University to be part of one of their discussions on social networking, because the disaster management system out there had given a problem to Purdue University, and I think it was located in a computer sciences school, and they were told that, can you develop a model which will say what is the fastest evacuation route for the city for people in case there is a major sort of a disaster. So they sort of worked on a very systematic model and informed everybody that this is how this is a model we have developed and this is what you will do. However, when they conducted the drill, the model failed miserably because their assumption was that everyone will exit the city through the shortest route. This was their assumption, and fair assumption, but society doesn't work like that. People don't function like that. What they found was that if there was a woman living in a particular place and her child was maybe 3 kilometers in a school, she ran to get her child before she exited. Similarly, there were guys or women who went to look for their spouse in their offices before they exited. So there was a lot of chaos in their drill. So that's when they realized that social factors play a very important role. So I think some of these things need to come through systematic research and observation if one is to really manage any kind of change or response systems. The third challenge is confining, determining how to anticipate and avoid and manage disruptive global environmental change. We know that this is happening. We are just dealing with far too many challenges, including how to manage garbage, e-waste, we are still grappling. We have not fixed any of these issues. Responding, determining what should be, what institutional and economic and behavioral changes can enable effective steps towards global sustainability and innovating. I think these are sort of identified as grand challenges, and they apply equally to the situations of disaster management. I really wish we were doing this in person, then we would have had a lively discussion about all the disconnect that we see in our work between science, policy, and society. And, where we know something is going drastically wrong, we tell our bosses, or we tell people, maybe our clients, and they don't want to listen to it. And then later on, it's discovered that, yeah, what you were saying is true. I'm sure all the engineers in this forum have had these kinds of experiences. Now, this is just one quick visual example of how, despite knowing what we are doing is problematic. So you see, this is a cartoon that is being circulated, particularly after the Bangalore floods. In fact, year after year, we see this, that cities are built on water bodies. We do land reclamation, and invariably we find flooding. We don't pay attention to drainages. I mean, this really is school science, and yet we err in such a major manner. So who is responsible? How do we really address this? Heat waves and urban heat island, we know that more heat absorbing surfaces, whether it's rooftops, buildings, and paved surfaces, or trapping of hot air between buildings, uh, not having tree cover, all of this we know creates severe warming. And the idea of urban heat island is something that we are seriously experiencing. Those who live in Delhi know that they are living in a gas chamber. Now, this is an interesting visual of which actually tries to show how development contributes to disaster. So if disasters are increasing, there are many elements of flawed development where we know that these are issues that are created by poor quality planning. Yeah, so inappropriate land use, environmental degradation, exposure of population and assets in hazardous locations, economic inequalities, weak social organizations, and deficient infrastructure. All of these are flawed development processes, which really create what we today experience as a multi-hazard context of disaster risks, because vulnerabilities are increasing. And are we therefore ready? If we fix, therefore the argument really is that if we fix our developmental approaches, make sure that they are risk informed, probably our vulnerabilities will be less and we'll be able to deal with disaster risks better. So the question here is who contributes to, who controls these decisions? Whether it's mining, whether it's constructing certain kinds of structures in seismic areas or on hill slopes, we create tea gardens or whatever, so there are many things, or monoculture, we just go and plant trees again in certain areas. So monoculture does that create a problem? I think we know that what happens. So this is the knowledge base we already have. We know what creates vulnerability, and we also know how to reduce that vulnerability and how to increase resilience. So this is again something that we know, we are aware of. We also know that disaster impacts are intersectoral. Yeah, it's not just, well, a disaster has happened, somewhere some heavy rain has happened, but we know that when flooding of this magnitude happens, whether it's in India or whether it's in Philippines or any of like Japan or any of the countries across the globe, we know that it's not a simple matter. There is a serious price that everybody is paying, both in terms of livelihoods, health, the entire economy goes for a toss. So it's multi-sectoral. And coming back to your feet is a huge, huge challenge. I want to draw our attention to the idea of climate change and what it means. So I want you to take a brief look at this very interesting pie chart, which actually tells us what will happen because of climate change. We know climate change is upon us. And in all of this, who's going to be impacted the most? Those of us who are professionals, who have good education and so on, probably will somehow survive. But we know that all of this is going to have serious impact on certain sections of the community, certain sections of the society. All right, I'm moving to the next slide. There's a lot of literature within social sciences which tells us that the fundamental challenge is because we have really pushed boundaries where our approach to profit-oriented and extractive practices, which is seen very, very evident in nature of urbanization, our approach to looking at our ecosystems. We feel that nature will regenerate, nature's bounty is endless, and it'll always regenerate. That's not the case. We have crossed what we call ecosystem boundaries, and we really are on the brink of extinction. That's something I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides as well. So the way we manage our water bodies and oceans, we know that we are dumping garbage, by tons and tons literally every day. And there's no way our ecosystem is going to survive that. Our orientation to work and automation has also changed, and that's also, I've talked about this earlier, is a cause for concern. The consequences are before us. I don't need to dwell on these consequences. We understand them. So we have now moved to the brink of extinction, and when the geologists used to believe that Anthropocene is something that's going to happen after another 500 or 1,000 years, but there are now many scientists who say that we have already entered Anthropocene, and the world is out of balance. We have created a planet in the name of progress and development where we are on the brink of extinction because there is no ecological balance. And this is a fact. So if you keep reading, literature, you will find that this is so. And I'm not being an alarmist. I have a lot of young people who say that they are not going to have children because what is that? Those children's future is something, whether it's water shortages, whether it's livelihoods, whether there are many sort of issues that youngsters today are very concerned about because the planet is really deteriorating at a very rapid pace. So we are on the course of what is known as the 6th mass extinction. Yeah. And these are all indicators that the rate of disappearance of species, extinction rates are really high, and we would see that 75% of the species disappearing in the next couple of centuries. And increased concentration of CO2 levels we are aware of. Nuclear weapons tests have left certain markers. We have doubled the nitrogen and phosphorus in our soils in the past century through our fertilizer use. And the largest impact we have caused the largest impact in the last 2.5 billion years on the nitrogen cycle. So all this is fact. This is science. It's not, something that one is pulling out of one's head. So we have put so much plastic in our waterways and oceans that microplastics are now just about everywhere, and they will leave an identifiable fossil records for future generations to discover. Yeah, we will be probably seen as a plastic society or whatever. And so I think plenty of reasons why we need to be worried and alarmed about. And again, these are visuals. As engineers, we need to look at, are we contributing to this or are we ameliorating this? Yeah, so whatever, there are all these things around us. How and in what way can we, are we contributing, or should we be sort of working towards mitigation or improving the situation? Do we need to come up with innovations? There are innovative solutions, but if we are kind of going to pursue More often than not, we are hired by either political masters or people with deep pockets, the money bags, who don't care for the environment and the ecology. So I think these are questions. So applications of systems approach, therefore, is vital, and integrating this knowledge. For example, local knowledge and awareness of complex socio-ecological systems is needed to build dams or bridges or drainage systems or even malls or even housing societies or housing complexes, yeah, in urban and rural areas. But we don't do that. I think lots of examples I'm sure you can see around you or you would read about as to how, when you have a very narrow vision of whatever you're constructing, you could end up with serious problems. Okay, this is a sort of complex chart and a flow chart, but it actually tells us what are the drivers and causes and what are the consequences. So I think it's a useful thing for us to really look at human conditions and environmental conditions and what are the various things that happen in terms of how humans and environment interact, how the ecology, how are we impacting the biosphere, the state of nature, and what kind of global environmental changes we are bringing about through our actions. And why this flowchart is useful is it also provides us, those boxes provide us with pointers as to what we can do. So it's really, it's not just something that helps us explain, but it also sort of tells us where action can be located, where we may locate possible changes and transformation. Now, in disaster risk management, these are things we try to do. Yeah, we try to recognize risk and vulnerability, and we identify all of that. We assess those risks, and we put controls, maybe structural, non-structural. We do cost-benefit analysis. We are involved in strategic planning. I think all of these actions, yeah, in disaster risk management are important, and we need to recognize it's not that everything starts only when a disaster occurs. We really need to look at what is it that we can do pre-disaster as well. Practical and conceptual level challenges in integrating this knowledge. What is it that really comes in the way? What I'm saying is very simple, appeals to normal sort of common sense and so on. But then why is it that it's not happening? Yeah. So when experts are working at the interface of science, policy, and society, the complex challenges that you face is how to identify sources of disagreement over environmental issues. What is it that needs to be saved and what is it that you can compromise? Can we let go of all our wetlands? Can we let go of all our lakes? Can we let go of, let's say, trees? These are important questions. Bangalore has really chopped more than 20, 30,000 trees to develop its infrastructure. So there are many causes of Bangalore floods. We are aware of that. How do you communicate uncertainty? Science knows some things, but science also doesn't know certain things. There are limitations to knowledge. And then how do you actually tackle controversial topics, well, such as genetic modification and use of biofuels, or how much is that ideal tree cover, and so on and so forth. So we need platforms to discuss problems disaster experts encounter and interaction, where between knowledge, policy, and society. I think these are things that we need. We need to have more conversations with people who are taking decisions and people who understand science, and also the disaster specialists. So all of us need to, and this is, I think, therefore, I really appreciate this organizing of this session where we can dialogue, we can discuss. This also kind of tells us what are the barriers and challenges. So there are concerns maybe very diverse. How do you reconcile diverse priorities and concerns? The goals could be competing. Different people want different things from the same sort of resources or same land. You have contradictory actions and practices. While you are planting trees, somebody else is doing something else and causing the trees to be destroyed. Politicization of science, we don't recognize this, but I think this is a reality that all of us encounter. that all science is very often politicized, and I am aware that many of us are called by um, governments to say that you sign off this and say that this is fine, that approve of this, give your scientific stamp of approval. And there are scientists who will say, yes, that is so, in exchange of money. And that's our reality. So Tehri Dam was a very good example where, there were a number of scientists who said that by creating such a huge water body in the terrain that we were building a dam, is going to induce seismicity. Of course, nobody can really predict earthquakes, but this was an argument. And then, of course, there were many other people. The government managed to get other scientists and said that, no, this is not sure and nothing will happen, and so on and so forth. So I think science is, there are uncertainties. We know that not everything is known. And very often politics takes precedence over, science and reality. So scienticization of policy is needed. Values and motivation and advocacy, all of this is something that scientists need to be involved in, and we need to recognize this interface and interaction. So it's not that we are operating in a vacuum. We are located squarely within all these various complexities and debates, and the situation is a vexed situation. This is from the UN Disaster Risk Reduction document, which actually tells us that we are in a given zone and we need to move towards risk-informed systems-based approaches and decision-making. And all our actions should be compliant with sustainability, where we are working systematically towards regenerative systems. We need to ensure that currently we are living with a lot of uncertainty where you have disasters. We need to be far more aligned with our development priorities and possible disasters that are likely to take place. So now I'm coming towards the last part of the presentation, just a few slides, where I want you to look at the each of those boxes. I will be back in just 1 minute. Give me a minute.
Yeah, when Madam is back, please let me know if you have any questions, and please, Jose, I think I've shared a link with you. Please note your questions in the link so that we are able to answer it at the end. Thank you. Yes, Madam, over to you.
All right. So risk-informed governance comprises many things. So that was for you to look at, and I think it also gives us a handle to identify where we could, work, or what are those areas where we could identify our domain and contribute to risk-informed governance. A lot of talk about nature-based solutions is on the way, and there is a lot. I mean, I find sometimes that, there's much more of rhetoric. So everybody talks about, we talk about SDGs. We are now talking about, working on SDGs, but what exactly does that mean from a more sustainability point of view? We may not necessarily be aware of. Similarly, when we talk of nature-based solutions, how does it speak with everything else? I think long-term understanding of these nature-based solutions is something we need to really talk about. So it's something that we need to critically interrogate and not follow blindly. This is another pathway that is being suggested as to joint framing of future competing goals and actions to be downscaled at the local level. And can we evaluate uncertainties? What is it that will cause disruptions? And can we factor those in our decisions? How can we co-create pathways? What kind of adaptive pathways towards localized goals to be designed for future disruptions to guide local actors in their journey? Very often decisions are made at some very high level and local communities know nothing about it. So localizing solutions, localizing action, giving more power at the local level is what is being proposed almost universally. These are, I thought I'll just very briefly share that there are a number of mechanisms that aim to strengthen the links between science and policy. You Google for it, you will find many of these. That there are international networks where the idea of creating sustainability scientific approaches and all of that is available. So it's not that no one's thinking about it. There's also a lot of action, global action, which is happening on this. Coordinated responses are important, and why they are important is what is in this slide. That indeed, we can reach our objectives faster. You optimize resource use. It leads to better. So all of this theoretical stuff we know, but yes, coordination would be definitely desirable. But I've flagged it because important for us not to work in silos. Now, disaster proofing the poor, this is a huge challenge because the biggest brunt of all disasters is borne by people who are poor, vulnerable, resourceless. So poverty plays a big role in keeping people vulnerable to disasters. And in the same way, disasters keep the poor in poverty by consistently wiping out what few resources they have. So I think there's no option but to reduce vulnerability and build resilience. So focusing on the poor is what I'm recommending very strongly. Every decision that we take, I think Gandhi said that we should really look at what would its impact be on the last person. Intersectoral approaches is something that collectively we need to work on. So change our ways of thinking and the silo approach, and be able to work across different structural levels, bringing in diverse participants and decision makers to evaluate the decisions that we take. Can we bring not just our bosses, but can we broad base the decision? Can we broad base the understanding by inviting other people on the decision making table so that we understand things better, we understand concerns better, addressing a variety of factors and mobilizing social capital to address DRR. I think very often for disaster risk reduction, if when you have, let's say, a hero or a star coming and saying you must wear seat belts, or somebody comes and says that don't honk. Yeah, I think we listen to them better. So yes, can we mobilize social capital that exists to address DRR? Can we coordinate policies to limit structured inequality among governments, service providers, communities, and private sector and other stakeholders? Yeah, usually it's the government that has a big voice, and very often there's a collusion between the government and the private players, which we need to definitely sort of look at it. It's especially important when disaster is not the explicit focus of the policy. So it's not that disaster is the job of a disaster management department, but disaster is everybody's business. So policies external to disasters have a critical impact on disaster risk reduction is what we need to recognize. And all investments in every area should be seen as an opportunity for action around disaster risk reduction. If you don't look at it that way, it's a missed opportunity. So risk-informed approaches to governance, what exactly are those? So these are risk-based decision processes, which helps us understand multiple concurrent threats, complex risks to and arising from development decisions and acting on that knowledge. So, I mean, early warning systems, we know that technology exists, but how do we sort of address those? It requires high levels of accountability that needs to be institutionalized, interdepartmental coordination, private sector accountability. I think these are important elements. So better and inclusive collaborative governance models are needed because inequality in money and power underpins the global phenomena of inequality that drives poverty, and asymmetries in knowledge and power limits people's access to participation and decision making. Why should I participate? Who is asking me? Even if I know something, yeah, I think asymmetries in knowledge and power we need to address. And Management is vulnerable, of course, to influence by powerful lobby groups and political actors. We know this. We talked about this earlier. And I think on that note, I end and thank you very much for your attention and for patiently listening. I'm done. I will stop sharing and we can open it up for discussion.
Yeah, thank you, madam. There are a few questions already in the Google document I had created. I'll just share the screen with you so that we are able to really answer those questions. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, in fact, very informative, excellent talk. I would say that it was to the point, and you really address the problems which are faced by government today.
Thank you.
Able to see my screen, madam?
Yeah, but it's really minute. So maybe you can read the question.
Yeah, sure. I'll read it for you. The thing is, Ranaji will come to you at the end so that we can answer others' questions first, if you don't mind. Yeah. So we had a question from Jayashree Valsan Nair from IIIT Bangalore. I think she is told that excellent exposition, Professor Janki. Given your vast experience in consultancy and practice in the area of disaster management, it will be great to hear from you a good example where dialogues between governance and other stakeholders had helped in a more effective disaster management, maybe through forecasting and quick response or through a well thought through response plan. In general, interdisciplinary dialogues takes time to understand language used in different domains. Hence, the communication channels have to be ironed out way before a disaster. Any thoughts on this from your experience?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very, very, very good question. So I think, like I said, there are a number of people, organizations, institutions, and spirited sort of individuals, professionals who are working on this. Now, I give you, I mean, since you are asking for example, there is a gentleman called Sanjay Srivastava who retired as a colonel in the army, and he has led one person sort of a campaign on lightning as a disaster, which is not even recognized. And lightning deaths in the country are, every single death is preventable, is something that he keeps saying. And because of the campaign, and it means that yes, you have to go out there and use all your networks and connections and meet the right kind of very, very senior people to explain this to them. And we definitely need to look at like-minded people, and even if there's one sensitive senior bureaucrat who's willing to listen, I think he or she can make things happen. And today in Chhattisgarh, I think he's been hired as a consultant, not a paid consultancy, but as someone who, and has taken, the government is taking his advice very seriously about running just simple campaigns that when it's raining, don't do ABCD. How do you sort of, so it's not that you necessarily need to put the arresters. Of course, wherever you have complexes of a certain kind, the arresters, lightning arresters are needed. But for simple sort of understanding that you don't go and stand under a tree, for instance. So these are things that are actually happening. I'm giving you very simple and basic examples so that we are talking about the poorest of the poor. I can give you many other examples. There are interagency organizations that have been set up and pre-disaster, like you rightly point out. These groups meet at least twice a year to get to know each other, exactly what you said. So this is anchored often by the state disaster management authorities. Again, it's only the enlightened government bodies that actually are proactive. So we need to keep working with them. We worked with government of Maharashtra. So now we have representation in the state disaster management authority. One of our faculty members is out there in the SDMA. So we keep talking about things, write letters, keep talking about, okay, you have funds, then you must provide training across the board in each of your departments on disaster management. So there is a lot of work that different people are engaged with, but India is a large country and disaster management is a state subject. So at the state level, people keep changing. So then, yes, we all often say this, that we have to start the process all over again. when the person changes in the government. But then I mean, how does transformation take place? The other route is that you have laws. But we have had the Disaster Management Act since 2005. And that itself was like an important step. It happened after the tsunami when the largest number of deaths took place. So the country woke up and said, okay, we need to. So yes, I think every time a serious disaster occurs, then the state responds. Odisha today has become in the forefront in managing disasters, and they're doing a lot of work. They have developed cyclone shelters in some of their poorest villages. So yes, I think things are moving, but I think the issue of linking disasters and development is a slow process. It's a very slow process because we still have the mindset that just as you say, okay, women and child is the work of Women and Child Welfare Department and nobody else's business. Yeah. So we need to change some of that. The Agriculture Department needs to think of women and children as well, Okay.
Yeah. There's one more. I think it looks like not a question, but extra kind of an input. Yeah. From Ashwini. All things considered, there is no way for solution despite dialogues, despite analysis of problem and solution from PPP. There is no way ahead unless we stop mega projects. Isn't that going down in developmental milestones? Better transport, for instance, call for improved roads, etc. All developments will be impacting the nature. I don't see much development or employment avenues happening unless we have mega structures. Have you already lost the race in better life ahead?
Okay, I'm an eternal optimist, so I will not say we've lost the race, but yes, I think, like I said, I do feel I agree with you. No one solution. There is no sort of. What I would say is that in everything that we do, we need to keep this larger perspective in mind. I have a nephew who says, I mean, his wife complains about it, but she says, my husband is so sort of environmentally conscientious. He says we should not have anything made of plastic in the house. Now, I think these are statements, and I think it's a very strong and powerful statement. I mean, I have traveled in public transport all my life, just as a, I mean, if I teach about environment and ecology, I don't want to be traveling like one single person in one car, even though I can afford it. So I think these are like personal sort of statements we make and choices because we believe doing what you believe in a given context. Of course, there are inconveniences. One has to look at feasibility. I'm not saying that everyone should do that, but yes, we should definitely push for more of public transportation, easier public transportation. We make sure that. So I think once you start thinking from a broader perspective, and I'm with you on this, that mega projects are fundamentally problematic because EIAs in this country are a sham. And but I think it's important not to say that stop all mega projects for all times to come. I do believe that small is beautiful, and small is, this is what Schumacher said and argues, and I definitely agree with that. But I think when you're looking at energy issues in the country, what are our choices? And we've had conversations with Jairam Ramesh, who has actually said this, that yeah, we are an energy deficit country. What are our choices? Hydroelectric power we have problems with, nuclear we have problems with. So I mean, what do you do? So I think there are challenges, and somewhere we have to balance it out. But when we are taking those decisions, when we talk of cost and benefit, who benefits and who pays the cost is an important question. So that's, I think, that's the key issue. Who is to bear the cost? Yeah. All right.
And I'm going to Dr. Rana Mukherjee's question. Yeah, he has 3 questions. Is present connection between stakeholders, policy makers, and decision makers satisfactory? If no, then any solution you see? This is the first question. Yeah, I think you can answer this question, and other 2 questions are related to IEEE MOVE program itself, so I can ask it together once you answer this question.
I have no advice to give anybody. I keep saying this because without understanding, I can't give advice. but I'm happy to be associated with you in whatever way and have conversations and so on. Is it satisfactory? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, I don't think there is, we take very myopic decisions. We take decisions which are driven by, considerations of money and profit, and we're not mindful of what the long-term implications of all of this is going to be. And the consequences are before us. I mean, precisely because of, poor quality decisions. You look at Kerala, they've built one huge mall called Lulu Mall. And now that entire area always gets flooded, So, I mean, we are just sort of, I mean, I honestly wonder whenever we construct anything, don't we even look at drainage? And on the other hand, you have a city like Gandhinagar, planned city and all of that, new city, capital of Gujarat. All of Gandhinagar, they have built roads. I think the contractor decided that he will elevate the roads so the roads will never be flooded. So all the roads are elevated, but all the water, when it rains, floods all the housing societies in the neighborhood. Who gave them permission to do this? It's bizarre, And I always wonder that there must have been some senior chief engineer, somebody somewhere who would have seen this and said, "Ki, this is a problem." And maybe someone said, "Ki, nahi, but road should be functioning." So do the so it's we are not thinking comprehensively at all. And I mean, it would not be fair on my part to blame the engineers, but I do often say that engineers need very strong social science inputs. You need a subject which is on science policy society in your, undergraduate year, maybe in the fourth year, which helps you develop a perspective. So I think the IITs have this scheme, that they opt for one or two courses in the humanities department, but other engineering colleges don't have this idea of science policy and society, and we need to integrate that. So just as within social sciences, we have opened up, and all the engineers and science graduates who come to us, they are absolutely delighted, and they are always like very happy about what they learn in the program, and we are happy about what they bring into the program, because in disaster management, modeling, prediction, forecasting, all of this is, so we have a specialization which is a GIS specialization which looks at technologies and technologies for disaster management. But everyone does the first year where they get a very strong perspective, which is a social science perspective of policy, society, and all of that. So they are constantly sort of looking at the kind of issues that I have shared with you.
Thanks a lot, madam. And the other two questions were specific to IEEE MOVE, that how do we work together? I think we'll continue this conversation along with the overall team. And since we have left with last 2 minutes, depending on this schedule, now I request our leader education, IEEE MOVE education team, Mausiki, to really thank madam and also the participants who are part of this session. And other questions, we'll keep you posted the answers to other questions over me.
I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Moshiki Kaur. I am an engineering educator. And Madam, today's lecture was so invigorating. I'm so thankful that we had you over, because the takeaway, I guess, from today's lecture would be, for me specifically, is how we cannot act as compartments if we want to overcome this challenge that we are facing of climate change, right? And to work together collaboratively. I loved your presentation. It was so well executed, how you put in all facets of how science, I mean, social sciences, technology, politics, everything should work hand in hand to work together and overcome disaster, and how we are a little bit insensitive at this point to our surroundings, how all of us can work a little bit and make little contributions, and thus make the world a better place. Thank you so much, madam. We are really delighted to have you today, and I hope we work with you in future. As Dr. Rana Mukherjee also suggested there, IEEE MOVE would love to work with you, and also have you around to create this awareness that you have started off today in our movement, as you have already created a lot of awareness among all our listeners here. they do have more questions, which, if you don't mind, we will send you over, as Ashoka ji just mentioned. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you. And I was surprised that you had such a large number of people who have come in on a Saturday evening.
Yeah, that was good. And I think your presentation was excellent, and we would like to continue to have you in our program, because I think we require a lot of inputs from you.
Sure. Anytime.
And thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot, madam. It's very good interacting with you, because the overall group here is engineering. I come from philanthropy background. I come from social work background. And I think it was really a very good eye-opener session, how different stakeholders can come together. And even with the IEEE MOVE, we might need a lot of your suggestion and a lot of your guidance, so that we are able to make this program successful across India, so that the more focus is on prevention. So we want to work around it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Now, can you share the mementos, Dr. Moshiki?
Yes, madam. I'm just, let me see. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a certificate of appreciation, and
thank you.
And this is a digital memento. We will be sending you the memento, physical memento.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, madam. It's a pleasure. And I would also like to thank all the participants and all the panelists who were part of this discussion. It was, I think, great having you. Almost it is 1.5 hours now in the Saturday evening, and I think great having you all. And we'll continue this journey to see how we can really work around disasters. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.